We just finished up week 14. So today is the 99th day of our Bible study, which is amazing. Who would like to recite our memory verse from last week? Anybody? Memory verse? No? Maybe we should pray first. Yeah, let's do that. Let's take some prayer requests, then we'll get back to the memory verse. All right. Our memory verse for this week, we're going to try it again. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. You want to go ahead and read it? You've got it. And then I know the verse for this week is a familiar one, but it's one that I really needed to just kind of meditate on this week. And that's Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. All right. So, week 14, and review, we have been in the book of Judges mostly, and last week we left off with Gideon. We found Gideon hiding in the bottom of a wine press, threshing wheat. So he was tending the harvest, he was harvesting, he was threshing wheat, but he was doing it in secret because he was hiding, right? Because the Moabites were horribly wicked people, and they were oppressing Israel because Israel wasn't serving God. So here Gideon is at the bottom of the wine press, and that's where the Lord finds him. And we discussed the Christophany because it was an angel of the Lord that appeared to him. And he calls him, as he's hiding in the bottom of a wine press, he calls him a mighty man of valor, or a brave warrior, right? As he's hiding in the bottom of a wine press. Doesn't sound very warrior-like or brave, but Jesus saw Gideon and called him what he had called him to be, right? So God called him a mighty man of valor because that's who he created him to be, this mighty man of valor. And there's nothing wrong with what Gideon was doing. Like, it was smart, right? He had to thresh wheat. He didn't want the Moabites to come and take it, so he's doing it in the bottom of a wine press, but it's still a little cowardly, right? The other thing that is interesting in this, it's like he was hiding the harvest, and that kind of stuck with me because I feel like we see that a little bit today as Christians. The harvest is ripe. There are people who are hungry for the word and the truth, right? God is raising up a people to harvest, right? Workers to send out into the field. But a lot of times as workers, we're timid because the world can be so harsh. You know, we don't want the persecution. You talk about the Lord at your job and you can get fired. Like, there are all these things that make us feel timid. People are afraid to stand up and say abortion is wrong, or, you know, living for the world is wrong, or living your own truth, or whatever else. People are afraid to speak up because there really is this sort of social persecution that happens, right? People, if you disagree with what somebody says, it's not that they just say, well, I don't agree with you. They want to destroy you because you don't agree with them, right? So there is this feeling of trying to hide things. And, you know, it's okay to talk about God if you know that the person you're talking to is a Christian, you know, and you kind of throw out these little signals and see if they're going to respond, if they're listening to his radio, or, you know what I mean? There's little things we do. But God has called us to be brave, right? A lot of times we're no better than Gideon at the bottom of a wine press, you know. But the harvest is ripe. It's waiting for us. So we need to be bold. We need to be men and women of valor and just go out, you know, and be zealous for God, you know. And I don't mean to scare people off. I'm not saying that, right? We want to be tactful. But we can be bold, you know, because God is with us. This is what he's called us to do. And then Gideon goes from somebody hiding in the bottom of a wine press to someone who defights. I'm sorry, I've been saying Moab. I mean the Midianites. So Gideon destroys the Midianites. He conquers them. And he gets the people together, and at first there's, over 30,000 men ready to go and fight. And these aren't just 30,000 farmers. These are 30,000 warriors ready to go and fight the Midianites. But God says, no, that's too many. Because if you go in with that many people and defeat them, they're going to say, oh, we did that. It's because of our large number we were able to conquer them. And so God's saying, if there is anybody here who's even hesitant about going, they're not feeling confident, just go ahead and send them home. So 22,000 people leave, and they're left with 10,000 warriors ready to fight. And these aren't people who are timid. These are people who want to go out and fight. And God said it's still too many. So he gives them this test, and he says, I'm going to have you divide the people according to the way they drink water, right? So he takes them down, and the people who knelt down and just put their lips to the water and drank directly from the water, and then there were a group of people who just scooped the water up with their hands and lapped it up with their tongues like dogs. And God said, yeah, no, I want the ones that lap it up like dogs. And there were 300 of them. He's like, those are the people I want to fight for me. They don't care what they look like. They're not trying to be dainty about it. They're thirsty. They're going for it. And not that there's anything wrong with like kneeling down and drinking directly from the water source, but that's a really good insight, Amy. So yeah, that's a good point. So the people who were just drinking directly from the water, they couldn't see what was going on around them. The people who scooped the water up with their hands and lapped it like a dog, they could keep their eyes on their surroundings. So that's an excellent point. So yeah, God were using these men, these 300 men who didn't like to have their back to a door. And so God told Gideon, with these 300 men, I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites. So you can send everybody else home. Let's just keep these 300. So let's see. We're in Judges chapter 7. And let me get, I guess it starts around verse 7. But Gideon still must have been feeling a little intimidated about going up against these people, because God says, get up, go down to the Midianite camp, for I have given you victory over them. That's what God says to Gideon. Get up, go down into the Midianite camp, for I have given you victory over them. But if you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant. Listen to what the Midianites are saying, and you will be greatly encouraged. Then you will be eager to attack. So that's what happens. Gideon takes the servant down, and he listens, and he overhears these two Midianite soldiers talking about a dream that one had had. And the way his friend interpreted the dream, he said it can only mean one thing. Gideon's going to beat us tomorrow, right? So at that, Gideon goes back to the Israelite camp, and then he shouts, get up, for the Lord has given you victory over the Midianites, right? He said what God had told him before he went to listen, but he didn't just say it. He ran back and he shouted it. So he had that confidence. He had heard what God had said, and now he believed what God had said, right? And he was acting out on faith. So, and that's what happened. We have 300 men, and this story is amazing, right? Just the brilliance of what he did with 300 men. This is what's amazing to me about it. They got rid of, almost 30,000 over 30,000 other people, other warriors, to fight with 300. And then Gideon did stuff to make it look like there were hundreds of thousands of people with them. So it's kind of like they had smaller numbers, but God made the small number look huge because of what they did. And God caused confusion in the enemy's camp, so they would turn and fight each other. Right? It's just amazing and brilliant. So the whole time, and goes with what you said, Amy, too. And verse 17, Gideon tells his men, he divided the 300 men into 3 groups and gave each man a ram's horn and a clay jar with a torch. And then he said to them, keep your eye on me, right? So that goes back to what Amy was saying about drinking the water, not letting yourself be distracted, but to keep your eyes on what you're supposed to. When I come to the edge of the camp, do as I do. And as soon as those with me blow ram's horns, blow your horns too, all around the entire camp, and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. So that's what happened. Suddenly they blew the ram's horns and broke their clay jars. They had clay jars with candles in them, right? So when they broke the clay jars and blew the ram's horn, there's all this light that's spread all over the place, and suddenly they feel like they're being set upon, right? Because normally every soldier didn't carry a lamp, right? He didn't carry a light, so it looked like there are a bunch of lamp bearers as well as all these ram's horns. Not everyone blew the ram's horn. It was only a few. So when they hear 300 ram horns and see 300 candles, they think there's 30,000 people on them like that. So they're confused, they're running, they know there must be a huge enemy that's swarming them, but they don't see him. So that's why they start attacking one another, because of all the confusion, right? And what they think and their ideas and their knowledge of warfare was totally used against them, right? The enemy doesn't change his tactics, right? So we know what he's going to do. We can use that to our advantage. We know how to pray, so we need to pray accordingly. So that's what happens. And the warriors within the enemy's camp started to fight one another. Then we get, they pursued the Midianite commanders, and they killed them, and they brought the heads of these guys to Gideon. So much for a cowardly guy hiding the harvest at the bottom of a wine press. Now the heads of his enemies are being brought to him, right? So Gideon then turns and he goes after people, right? So we see this shift in Gideon. He really becomes this mighty man of valor that the Lord saw in him when he didn't, when he was just harvesting at the bottom of a wine press. It's really remarkable. So then Gideon kills Zabin and Zalmunna. Gideon crossed the Jordan River with his 300 men, and though they were exhausted, they still chased the enemy. I love that verse too. That's in chapter 8 now. Chapter 8, verse 4. So Gideon and his men, they crossed the Jordan, and he crosses it with his 300 men, and though they were all exhausted, they continued to pursue the enemy, right? This is not like reactive. They're not being defensive. They're being offensive. They're going after the enemy. And I feel like that's what we're to do. We're to go after him in our prayer life. Like, we are the ones who have the God of heaven standing with us. We know that he has called us to reach the nations, to reach people, to spread the gospel, to establish his kingdom here on earth. We know that. So we need to act like it, right? We're not trying to defend anything. We're going after what God has told us is ours, right? And we're doing what he's called us to do according to his word. And that's what we see here. they cross the river. When they get across the river, they come by some different towns and cities, and they say, "Look, we're exhausted. Give us food and shelter." And the people, and they say, "If you do, we're gonna take care of these guys." And these towns are saying, "No, you go kill them, and then you come back, right?" But they did it in a taunting way. So Gideon's like, "All right, if that's how you want to play it, I will come back when I've defeated these guys. And when I do, you're going to be sorry. Like, you're going to pay." And so he did so much for somebody who's cowardly, right? Now he's got the heads of his enemy hanging off his donkey, right? And he crosses the river. He tells people his warriors are hungry, he needs a place to stay. They don't accommodate him, and they taunt him. And he's like, "All right, I see you. You know, I'm going to throat punch you when I get back here." Right? Right? Exactly. All right. Well, and he doesn't mess around. Like, God, like, he does not call a bunch of weaklings, or scaredy cats or people who are afraid to speak up. He calls people who are going to bring back the heads of their enemy. And if somebody wrongs them and their family, they are going to, throat punch them. Yes, very much. David. I mean, the love is not a passive, weak thing. It's a strong thing, right? And kindness is strength. Humility and meekness is strength under control. And that's what we see here. So Gideon returned to Succoth, and he said to the leaders, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna. When we were here before, you taunted me, saying, 'Catch them first, then we'll feed your exhausted army.' Then Gideon took the elders of the town, and he taught them a lesson, punishing them with thorns and briars from the wilderness. He also tore down their tower and killed all the men in the town." Then Gideon asked Zebah and Zalmunna, the men he captured, and he said, "The men you killed at Tabor, what did they look like?" And they said, "Well, they looked like you. They were tall, and they had the look of a king's son. They were stately." And he said, "Yeah, they did, because they were my brothers. If you hadn't killed them, I wouldn't kill you now." And he killed them. So he wasn't messing around. So Gideon killed them both and took their royal ornaments from their necks and their camels. And then he makes an ephod out of it. And the people wanted him. He doesn't make an ephod out of the camel stuff. That's not true. Disregarded. Okay, he takes the ornaments from their camels. Then, all right, so the Israelites say to Gideon at this point, "You be our king. You be our ruler." And Gideon said, "No, God is your king. God is your ruler. I'm not. How could I take the place of God?" And he said, "What I will do is take earrings from these people you've defeated." So he took all the earrings, and he made an ephod out of that, not the camel's decoration. So he made a sacred ephod from the gold and put it in Ophrah, his hometown. Throughout the rest of Gideon's lifetime, about 40 years, there was peace in the land. Now we get to Abimelech. Abimelech is Gideon's son. Gideon had 70 sons, like 70 sons alone, not counting daughters, right? And most of them were from his wives. He only had one of his sons from a concubine, right? And the concubine was from the land of Shechem. Does anyone remember the town of Shechem? Or the region of Shechem. Where have we heard that before? Raise your hand. Anybody? Do you guys remember? I'll give you a minute to think about it. Yes, Shechem. And what I'm talking about is with Joseph and his brothers. No? Anybody? Okay, so Shechem is the town that Joseph's brothers went and killed all the men after the prince of Shechem had slept with their sister, or raped the sister. They went, tricked all the men in Shechem to get circumcised, and 3 days afterwards, when they're feeling a little puny because their schmeckles had been guillotined, they went in and slaughtered them all, right? So that's the history of this town, right? So they probably weren't really excited about the Israelites coming back to town from Egypt to begin with, right? So here they are. Hey, well. Hey, you're welcome. Hey, it's in the Bible. Right. It was Yiddish. Like, I don't know what else I'm supposed to say. So, okay. So here we go. So Abimelech, getting back, Abimelech is one of Gideon's 70 sons. And his mother, the concubine, was from Shechem. So basically, Abimelech goes and he talks to the people of Shechem, and he says, do you want to deal with all 70 of Gideon's sons ruling over you, or would you just like one of his sons ruling over you? And if so, let it be me. Hey, my mom's from here. You know, we're family. I'm from your area. Like, who's going to rule over you? Like me. So basically, they get Shechem, and the people of Shechem agree. And Abimelech gets money, and he pays these mercenaries basically to murder all of his brothers. So 70 brothers, well, he goes to have him kill 69 of Gideon's sons, and then the youngest of Gideon's son actually escapes. But all the other brothers are killed by Abimelech, Gideon's son. And so we just have this long history. We see the history of Shechem, and it is important to remember that because they did not like the Israelites. They're never going to like them. And then we have Abimelech, who is Gideon's own son, killing all of his brothers so he could rule. And he convinces the people of Shechem to do it. But there's all this inner turmoil, right? So there's all this backbiting and the politics of it all. And Shechem ends up revolting against Abimelech. And we're in chapter 10 of Judges. Well, right around chapter 10. Get back here. I wanted to read. This is interesting. So now we have Abimelech, and he's attacking the town of Thebez. Thebez means brightness or to shine. And he captured it, but there was a strong tower in the middle of this town. And all the men and women, the entire population of the town, fled to this strong tower. They barricaded themselves in and climbed to the roof of the tower. Now Abimelech followed them to attack the tower, but as he prepared to set fire to the entrance, a woman on the roof dropped a millstone, and it landed on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Quickly, Abimelech says to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and kill me. Don't let it be said that Abimelech was killed by a woman." So the young man ran him through with his sword, and Abimelech died. When Abimelech's men saw that he was dead, they disbanded and returned to their homes. And in this way, God punished Abimelech for the evil he had done against his father by murdering his 70 brothers. God also punished the men of Shechem for all their evil. So the curse of Jotham was Gideon's youngest son who had escaped. So the curse of Jotham, the son of Gideon, was fulfilled. So after Gideon, we have a few other judges. We have Tola, Jair, and then we see where the Ammonites oppress Israel. And they oppress Israel, and there's always this oppression that comes on, and then eventually they cry out. But in the midst of this, reading this, and we see it time and time again, Israel turns from God, and they start doing what's right in their own eyes. So they start sinning, they start doing what they want. They start pleasing the flesh, they start worshiping other gods, and then they get oppressed by the people around them. Because God can't protect them if they turn from him and they don't serve them. Just like we said, if you're not serving God, you're a slave to the enemy. That's just the way it is. It's either or. So they are turning, and I was thinking about how often we do that. Sometimes we're so comfortable in our fears and our insecurities and our addictions and our mindsets and our religion even. Our rituals and patterns, and it can be so oppressive, and yet we just live in it for years before we finally have enough and we cry out to the Lord. He always lets us repent. We don't have to live like we do a lot of the time, but we do because it's just familiar or seems like the easiest thing or whatever. But so when we read this and we keep thinking and seeing the children of Israel turn away from God and serve other gods, it's not just all about, it's not so blatant like, Satanism or Christianity. A lot of times we're serving the flesh in other ways, other addictions or oppressions or mindsets. And God's there, and he hears us, and he hasn't abandoned us. He still had pity on the children of Israel. So the Israelites pleaded with the Lord and said, "We have sinned. Punish us as you see fit." And then they put aside their foreign gods and served the Lord. After they started to do that, the Lord was aggrieved by their misery. But we see them abandoning God over and over again. Then Japheth becomes Israel's judge. Japheth of Gilead was a great warrior. He was the son of Gilead, and his mother was a prostitute. I'm going to skip over this because we have a couple really good things to get into. And again, the Ammonites have oppressed Israel. Then we see Jephthah becomes a judge to deliver Israel. And then, I don't know, does anybody, for the reading of Judges 11, and we got to Jephthah's vow. Did anybody read that and find that a little odd? I did. Jephthah basically tells the Lord, if you give me victory in this battle, I will sacrifice the first thing that comes out of the house to greet me when I get back from my victory. Which I don't know why you would vow that. Like, if you're talking about what's coming out of your house, it's most likely going to be a person. It's not like he was thinking, if the dog comes out, So, yeah, a goat out of his house. I don't know. It seems strange. But lo and behold, it's his daughter that comes out of the house. And she comes out with a tambourine. And not only is it his daughter, but it's his only child, right? His beloved daughter, his only child, she comes out and, you know, he sacrifices her. Like, that's what it says. I was a little like, I remember reading that before, but I kept thinking, like, Lord, give me some insight into that. I haven't gotten it yet. So if anybody has any thoughts or insights on it. No. And that's good. Say that again.
That was all his idea. So I'm asking, would the Lord have held him to that? Because it wasn't the Lord asking him to sacrifice the first thing that came out. So maybe it was in an instance he really didn't have to do it.
Right. But because he vowed.
But because he vowed it, he did it.
That's
But
a
it was
good
an
point.
unnecessary vow.
How many times do we feel as Christians that we have to make some huge sacrifice or we have to do something to earn a victory, right? When we don't. Like, we make these big gestures and we think, oh, I've got to do all this. But it's not necessary. It wasn't necessary. But because he vowed, he had to follow it through. A prophecy? Do I think it was a prophecy? No, I don't. It may have been. I don't remember reading anything about it. Oh, you mean like a foreshadowing or like a symbolism of? Yeah, I mean it does seem a little bit like Abraham with Isaac and going up because he did sacrifice her as a burnt offering. So, but maybe he was just saying it as a grand gesture because he thought he needed to. I don't know. Like I said, I don't have the revelation on it. Above. Yeah, because he vowed by God. Right, and especially if they swore by the Lord that they would. So yeah. Yeah. Well, he said before the Lord, if you give me this victory, and he told his daughter, why? Why have you come out of the house? You've destroyed me, and now do you realize what I have to do? And she said, yeah, you have to do it. You told the Lord you would, so you have to. Adrian. Speak.
When I'm at Ridgeview, I I I made a promise to myself, that but now I'm promise keep because I make a promise to God that He would let me live to see my nephew get to be the youngest one to be grown, my oldest one, but threatened to kill them residents trying to kill me, but I just give it all to Jesus. That's all I could do.
Yeah, that's it. That's good.
Mr. Lilje.
Yes.
Just to close it out in terms of, I was thinking about the scripture that says life and death is in the power of the tongue and how we don't take that seriously.
Yeah.
Like I was just thinking about that, like right before you said it. And when he swore by the Lord, so he had to keep his word, and his daughter said, well, you have to do it because you said it. But that's not the life we live today.
Yeah.
Like the Bible says, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay, and we overcommit all the time or just say things flippantly. But Johnny and I were talking about how we're going to have to give an account for every idle word that comes out of our mouth. So
That's
anyway.
good. And because it didn't just affect him. His daughter lost her life. And it made it very clear that she asked for 2 months to go up in the mountains and weep and mourn because she was going to die a virgin. Now, she wasn't upset because she was going to die a virgin. She was upset because she would never bear children. So it didn't just affect him and his daughter, but he had no descendants, right? So it does affect, like, what we say is important, and so that's really good. I like where this is going, but we're going to move on. So, but that's good. Like, these are good things to ponder, right? Everything in the word is important, and I don't want to skip over something just because I don't understand it or because it's not a pleasant thing to ponder, right? And we've got a couple of that in the book, or a couple of things like that in the book of Judges. So we go through other judges. Now, again, I'm going to skip over, but we have like Ebzan and Elon and Abdon, these different judges, and it doesn't really say much about them. One had 30 sons and 30 daughters. Another one talks about them being a judge for 10 years. Another one, 8 years. And it usually names where they were from, what town, what tribe, and where they were buried, as long as how long they ruled. So all of those numbers are significant. The towns are significant. It's historically factual. It's what happened in history, but there's also spiritual symbolism and significance to it. If you have time to look over it, I'm going to be really quick on the book of Samuel, or I mean on Samson rather. So we all know the story of Samson. Samson is born to a barren woman, and an angel of the Lord, who was also a man, appears to her and says, "You're going to have a son, and I want you to dedicate him as a Nazarite." So do we remember what the Nazarites are? Right? Not the Nazarene, but the Nazarites. These are people who, they made a special vow not to drink alcohol or take anything from the vine. So they couldn't eat grapes or raisins, no wine, nothing like that. No alcohol was to pass their lips, or anything that could possibly ferment was to touch their lips. They weren't to cut their hair, and they weren't to touch dead bodies. Well, they didn't really have that kind of ale type stuff, or honey, anything that ferments. They weren't to have alcohol. So it would be kind of like us splitting hairs and saying, well, this is, mead. It's made from honey. It's not. So yeah, they just weren't supposed to have anything alcoholic, right? They were to be to keep their bodies extra pure. And so, again, this is another Christophany, when the angel of the Lord, who's also a man, appears to Samson's mother. And we know that because Manoah, Samson's father, called upon the Lord and said, whatever appeared to my wife, Lord, if that was from you, let it come back so we can get some more details on what you mean. And so that's what happened. And he was so much like a man that Samson's father, Manoah, didn't realize it was the angel of the Lord. So he's talking to him, but so we get all that. And he asks him, not if, but when your words come true, how are we supposed to, what standards are we supposed to have our son live up to? And he said, just make sure your wife follows everything that I told her, and make sure she's not eating any grapes or anything while she's pregnant, because he was to be totally pure. So that right there shows you life starts at conception, people, right? So, so Samson's born, and as he grew, the Lord blessed him. You see here. And then we get to Samson's riddle. So Samson is on his way. He spots this Philistine woman. The Philistines are who were oppressing Israel at the time. Samson sees a Philistine woman, and she looks good to him. So he talks to his parents, say, hey, I think I want to marry her. And they try to talk him out of it. He was determined, again, for a Nazarite to marry a Philistine when he's supposed to keep himself extra pure. Like a Levite wasn't allowed to marry somebody from outside of his tribe, right? He couldn't do. That's just the Levite. The Nazarites are supposed to take it a step further and be ultra pure, ultra holy. And here Samson is like, yeah, no, I want to marry this Philistine, a woman from the people who are oppressing us. So, anyway, so they're going to meet this woman and talk to her. He's going to introduce her to his parents, and this young lion attacks, and the power of the Lord, the Holy Spirit came on him, and the strength, and he ripped the lion's jaw apart, killed the lion, and he did it so quickly and smoothly and so effortlessly. His parents never knew a lion even attacked their convoy. So later on, he's going back to go back for the wedding, and on his way he looks for the carcass of the lion that he had killed, sees a beehive in it, takes the honey, gives it to his parents, and then once he gets he's not supposed to dead like a human body, but yeah, it's not supposed to come in like a cadaver. Yeah, it is kind of gross, but he was proud of what he did, I guess. So you definitely see this pridefulness, right? Like, and we see that because he gets to his own wedding, and his father-in-law appointed 30 men, including his best man. He appointed the bridal party, basically, and they said, these are your groomsmen. One of them's your best man. The father of the bride-to-be appoints them. And then Samson's trying to show off, and he gives them this riddle. It's like, what's sweet and also strong? And he knows nobody's going to guess because he hadn't even told his parents about killing the lion, let alone that he found honey in it and gave it to him. So everybody agreed to the riddle, but if they lost the riddle, they'd have to come up with like 30 cloaks, and it would have cost a lot of money. So they didn't want to lose, so they go to Samson's bride-to-be and say, you need to figure out this riddle for us, tell us what it is, because we don't want to be out all that money. And, so that's what happens. She pesters him, and she manipulates him. She says, if you really loved me and cared about me, you wouldn't keep anything from me, so why don't you tell me what the riddle is? And she kept on him. He kept telling her no, and she pestered him. And I think it says pestered for 7 days straight before he finally gave in and told her. And the moment he did, the people come to Samson and they say, well, what's sweeter than honey and what's stronger than a lion? And Samson, I love this. Okay, it's so funny to me. Judges 14, verse 18. He sees where these people have solved the riddle, and then Samson says, he replies, if you hadn't plowed my heifer, you wouldn't have solved my riddle. All right? But get this. So basically he's saying his bride-to-be was already being unfaithful, but who else is constantly unfaithful? God keeps telling Israel, and in the word he keeps saying, Israel turned from God and they prostituted themselves with other gods. They weren't faithful. We see this correlation in Samson's life and how these people that he loved could not be trusted. They kept turning on him, and they were wicked, right? So, but it's pretty clever how he basically says that. So after that, he goes and he kills 30 men, and he takes their belongings, and then that's how he pays back the wager for the riddle. So right here, he's broken another vow by touching dead bodies. He killed 30 men and took their clothes. And then that's how he paid. So he broke another vow by touching the dead bodies here. And so his bride to be, her father, thought Samson doesn't want anything else to do with her, so he gave her to Samson's best man, one of the 30 men that he had appointed to stand with them. Later on, during the wheat harvest, Samson comes back, and he's wanting to go in and be with his wife, who is not his wife. They never officially got married. She was given to another man. And he comes in, and the father-in-law wouldn't let him in. He said, I already gave her to somebody else because I thought you hated her because of what she did. And the whole heifer comment, right? Like, so my mistake, but I didn't think you wanted her anymore. And so Samson's like, because of what you've done to me, I'm going to burn all the crops. And that's what he does. He ties fire, so he ties the fire basically to the end of 300 foxes' tails, and he sets them loose on their fields that are ready to be harvested, and it burns down all the fields. Like, that's what he does. So the Philistines demanded that Samson be turned in. The people of Israel are even saying, look, the Philistines are really coming against us now. We're going to turn you in. So anyway, Samson keeps escaping because of his strength. Let me see here. So the Spirit of the Lord comes on Samson, and he snapped the ropes that he had been bound by as if they were burnt strands of flax, and they fell from his wrists. Then he found the jawbone of a recently killed donkey. He picked it up, and he killed 100,000 with it. 1,000 Philistines with it. And then they named the place Jawbone Hill. So again, we see this with Samson, where he keeps falling for the wrong women. They keep manipulating him. They keep turning on him. They can't be trusted. And then Samson meets Delilah. We all know the story of Samson and Delilah, right? Like, she kept manipulating him for 1,100 pieces of silver. Samson was in love with her. She obviously wasn't in love with him. She loved the money more than him. Let me see. She kept trying to trick him into giving her the secret of his strength, and he kept lying to her. Like, he didn't realize she actually wanted to betray him, but he wasn't going to tell her. He just, and so he keeps telling her, and she keeps saying, hey, here come the Philistines. And he wakes up, and lo and behold, he's tied up the way he told her to be tied up. He just wasn't really wise about any of this either, right? But Delilah finally realized he finally told her if his hair was cut, that he would lose his strength. That's what happens. Samson, they catch Samson then because he doesn't have strength. They gouge his eyes out. Samson later on, his hair starts to grow back. His strength comes back slowly. And he's led into a temple. Now, this isn't a palace. He was led into a temple where they worshipped other gods. And they brought Samson in to make fun of him, torment him, to entertain all the people who had gathered in the temple. The temple was full, standing room only. And on top of that, literally, there were 3,000 men and women on the roof of the temple, all there to watch Samson be tormented in the temple of their god, their false god. And so when Samson's there, he prays for the Lord to give him strength one more time, as he has a servant lead him over to the supporting pillars of the temple. And he said, let me die with the Philistines. And that's what happens. He tears down the temple, kills at least the 3,000 people on the roof, and however many people were in the temple. But if they could fit 3,000 people on the roof, there was probably a whole heck of a lot more just in the temple, and they're all killed. And then talks about the idolatry in the tribe of Dan, which is another unpleasant story to read from the Bible. It seems really familiar too. We get we can see the terrible wickedness in Israel. All of these scriptures it keeps saying, like in Judges 17 verse 6 is one of the verses, but there's multiple verses where it says the same exact thing. In those days, Israel had no king, and all of the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. God was supposed to be their king, yet we have verse after verse where it says, in those days, Israel had no king. God wasn't their king. He wasn't the king of their hearts. He wasn't the king of their land. They were not serving him. And so we see this horrible wickedness. We see the Levite and his concubine. And that's another story. It really reads like Sodom and Gomorrah. The Levite goes in for shelter. This man tells him to come and stay with him, not to stay in this town square because of the wickedness of the people in the town. And as he's there taking shelter, the men of the town come and knock on the door, and they said, hey, send that traveler out. We want to have homosexual relations with him. Like they wanted to have sex with this guy. And he begged him not to. He said, here, take my virgin daughter. You can take his concubine. And but they refused. So the Levite at the last minute pushes his concubine out the door, shuts the door, and the men in the town ended up raping her and to death, literally to death. And so this Levite traveler opens up the door, sees the concubine slumped there the next day, and says, hey, get up, let's get out of here. And she doesn't move because she's dead. So he takes, and this is one of the stories in the Bible that people really get weirded out about, and understandably so. He takes this dead concubine and he cuts her up into 12 pieces. There are 12 tribes in Israel. And he sends a piece of her to each tribe. And because of that, the people of Israel have this wake-up moment. And they say there has not been this kind of wickedness since before we crossed over the Red Sea. They had been, it is at least 300 years they've been in the Promised Land, and they're saying this has gotten so out of control. This is the worst thing we've seen. And so it woke them up. That man doing that and sending sounds like a horrible thing, but that in that moment, we see in Judges 20, the 20 verse 1, it says, then all the Israelites were united as one, and they came together. And over again in chapter 20, it says, all the people were one, and they came together. And they are saying, this is ridiculous. What are we going to do? So basically, they punished the tribe of Benjamin, that was the town that the concubine, the tribe that tribe that the town belonged to that had done that to the concubine. And so basically, Israel tries to take care of it on their own. They realize there's exceeding wickedness, and they go to the Lord, and they keep asking the Lord, should we fight Benjamin? Should we not? God does give them victory after 3 tries, but they're still trying to rule themselves, right, apart from God. And at the end of Judges 21, verse 25, it says, in those days Israel had no king, and all the people did what seemed right in their own eyes. They are still at that place. And then we'll do Ruth next week, but because I knew I couldn't get through Ruth today, but we'll go over Ruth first thing next week, but that's what gets us into Ruth. So we have the children of Israel are divided, right? They're divided, They have no king. In other words, they're not serving God, and they have no human king. Everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. They have this need for somebody to unite them. This Levite he got them together, but they still didn't come together and change their ways. And so it sets us up for the book of Ruth. And we know Ruth is the grandmother of King David. So we're getting set up for someone to come and unite the children of Israel. But there's great need because the wickedness in Israel, them doing what was right in their own eyes, is literally as bad as it was in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Literally as bad. And that's what's important about that. Sorry, guys, we're like 5 minutes over already. But oh, you don't have band practice? Okay, good. All right. Good. So does anybody have any questions about what we just went over? Or do you want me to take an extra 10 minutes and go over the book of Ruth? I mean, go ahead, Johnny.
Does it say in the Bible that Samson killed more Philistines during his death than it? Okay, that's what
Yes.
I thought. I just want to make sure. I know you didn't say it, but I'm sure it
Yes.
was in there. You covered so much stuff, but I thought I'd share that with
It says
everybody.
exactly that. Yeah, he killed more in his death than he did in his life. And he was probably more humbled and open in his death than any other time in his life. Like, he was very prideful. He was raised to believe that he was chosen. Luke.
The thing with Samson that I find kind of remarkable, and even in his death, I would almost disagree with you. I think it was just another selfish act, like he was just getting revenge. Like he didn't strike me as a good guy in any way, and I find it interesting that the Spirit of the Lord still came upon him, even though he was really a wicked guy, a self-centered guy. And I guess it's just that the Lord had a plan for Samson, and regardless of his personality, God still used him.
And I think Samson gets a bad rap, and you're right, the stuff that Samson did. But I feel like I guess I can relate to that because I feel like God can use all things for our good, right? So God used Samson to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines. Absolutely used them. And his mistakes, his sins, his shortcomings got him to a place where he's in a temple with all the kings, all the rulers, the commanders of the army, all the upper crust of the Philistines, plus they were packed full in the temple and 3,000 extra people on the roof. So it's not that he just killed more people in his death than his life, but he killed the most important people. Wow. Like the Philistines were completely decimated by that one act. And I believe that was the only selfless act. If it was selfish, he wouldn't have said, let me die with them. He would have said, let me kill them all and die as an old man in my bed, But he didn't. He said, let me kill them all. I think that's a very selfless thing.